It's great to see the latest exhibition on screen production is screening in Australia in March and onwards, and from Seventh Art Productions. And the film is Dawn of Impressionism, Paris, 1874. And it's my great pleasure, as always, to talk to the producer, if you like, and certainly the co-writer of Dawn of Impressionism, Phil Grabsky. Phil, welcome again to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. I love movie Metropolis.
Glad to hear it. Now, again, this is such a fascinating story, and there's so much history and politics and everything else that is part of this documentary about such wonderful paintings. Um, Tell me about how it first came about, because I gather usually the origin is exhibitions that are being held.
Do you know, Peter, this is now our 39th exhibition on screen film.
Oh,
The first one was, and the first time anyone had ever done this kind of thing for the cinema was us back in 2011 with Leonardo from the National Gallery. And here we are, what, 14 years later, 13 and a half years later with our 39th. And within those films, those many films, we have covered a good number of the Impressionists. I think it's fair to say they are the most popular genre in art. Um, of course, there are others, but we've looked at Manet and Monet and Pissarro and Degas and Renoir and Van Gogh more than once, post-impressionist, Cézanne. We made a very interesting film about the first dealer, a guy called Paul Durand-Ruel, without whom there probably wouldn't be the Impressionists as we know them. But I've always been fascinated by, whatever film I make, whether it's Mozart or Monet, I'm always interested in knowing about the period because nobody emerges from a void. People emerge from a context.
mm.
If Mozart had not been born in Salzburg in 1756, we might well not know of him. It's not a given. If he's born in, I don't know, somewhere else, Paris, London, in 1760, he might never have become the greatest composer, arguably, of all time. So I've always been fascinated by why do the Impressionists more or less emerge with this, what we now call First Impressionist Exhibition in spring 1874. And then finally, lo and behold, we heard that the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, one of the world's great museums, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, another of the world's great museums, were sharing an exhibition on just that subject. What is it about spring 1874 in Paris that leads this group of artists? And it wasn't just Impressionists, there's actually 7 or 8 well-known names, but there's about 20, 23 others that people might not know of. What leads them to have this small, basically unsuccessful exhibition in an apartment just before the Salon has its annual exhibition, which is one of Europe's great moments every year. In Paris, it's seen by 500,000 people, which in a population far smaller is basically anyone that could go went. Whereas this first show was only seen by 3,000 people. They only sold 4 paintings. But it was the start of what we now call the Impressionists. So these days, it's more or less half our films, maybe more than half the films are based on exhibitions. Other films are just based on my desire to make a film about Edward Hopper or Mary Cassatt or whoever it might be. But we went to the Musée d'Orsay, went to the National Gallery of Art, Washington, said we would love to make a film about this exhibition and the story more broadly. They said, great, and here we are.
And well done on that, because it certainly gives a different perspective, even though, as you said, you've covered a number of those painters before, but it doesn't matter because you've put a different context to it. And I found the letters, the readings, the commentary, etc., an essential and interesting part of this film.
It's very interesting. I mean, I've part of me doesn't want to repeat myself. So, I remember making a series of films. I made a series of films about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire for the BBC. Big series. I think it was shown on ABC. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, I can't, that's Roman history done. I've got to move on. And I kind of imagine that television will think the same, that they're not going to repeat a series about the Roman history for a little while, because I've just done this big 6-part series. But actually, if you look at television carefully, it's constantly repeating itself.
Hmm.
Endlessly, the same topics come up again and again. So I don't know why I'm quite so nervous about it. But there are definitely artists, in fact, probably all of our artists are so extraordinary, and the artwork is so extraordinary that they are definitely worth repeated viewing. Our recent Van Gogh Poets and Lovers film is our fourth Van Gogh film. It is our second most successful film. The exhibition that we based it on in London, and there are plenty of Van Gogh exhibitions, but this exhibition is the most popular, or was the most popular ticketed exhibition the National Gallery have ever had. So people, if there's a new storyline, something new to say, or just an excuse to look at these paintings and these stories again, then there's justification. um, what we tried to do that was different, as you pointed out, was rather than just have a narrator tell the story, we scoured the archives to find letters, correspondence, to hear the voices of the artists themselves. Now, some of this had been done by the exhibition, and some of it we did ourselves. And it's it, it's always the way you should start with a documentary film, is to start with the correspondence. With Mozart, I started with the letters, Chopin, Monet. Sometimes the letters are so great that you can make an entire film about Monet, as I did, just based on the letters. You don't need any interviews on narration. And Van Gogh, Poets and Lovers, our last film, was very much, very much benefited from the fact there are these 900 plus extraordinary letters of Van Gogh. Now, in the Impressionist exhibition, it's interesting, one or two of them don't talk about it at all, or nothing survived. And you can read into that a little bit that we now look back and think of it as this extraordinary moment. Did all of them? They can't possibly have foretold at that point, when they are starving artists and nobody wants their work, that they're going to it's going to take off in the way that it did. But anyway, there's much to benefit from and appreciate when you actually hear the voice of Bert Morisot or
Yeah.
whoever it might be. And then we have the only other voices we have are the curators, obviously experts in their field, for extremely experienced, talented women, two from France, two from Washington, two from Paris, two from Washington. And as ever with exhibition on screen, what we're encouraging people to do is, we're all so busy. Just take 85, 90 minutes out of your day, go to, and Australia has fantastic cinemas. I've visited them more than once.
Hmm.
And just sit there and revel in what humans are capable of. And I'm nervous about. I don't look forward to turning on the news these days, because all I see is destruction. And I just want to balance that with the beauty and the narrative, and in some cases the optimism that these artists had. And I think that we all need that. And even if you have seen a film about Claude Monet or Renoir before, one, this puts it all in context, and two, you're going to hear and learn things that you didn't know, i.e., why 1874. But three, it is an excuse just to look at these extraordinary paintings on the big screen in high definition without wanting to look at your phone or eat make a cup of tea or
Absolutely agree. It's absolutely fascinating. One of the perspectives that I found so interesting was the issue about the gatekeepers, the ones who decided, the judges decided what paintings were
yeah,
appropriate to be displayed and ones that were rejected. And as watching this documentary, I was thinking, what gives them the credentials to make those
yeah.
judgments?
So, I mean, this is true of any artist that I've made a film about or composer has had to go to somebody who is basically the gatekeeper. It might be the Emperor Joseph, it might be, I mean, whoever it might be. And it's no different in filmmaking. So I've been doing this for 40 years. The first 20, purely for television, I'm in the hands of the commissioning editor. I send in my proposal, I go and meet them, and they ultimately are the person that decides more or less, certainly whether it's going to be on their channel or not.
Hmm.
So who are these people? How do they get to this position? Um, and I would say that certainly within television, one of the reasons that I transferred to focusing on film is that there was a change. Um, let me with us for film, now that we've established this network, we self-fund the films, but in a way, there's a disadvantage of that because it's a risk every single time, and every penny we get just goes into the next production. On the other hand, I have creative freedom, or I and my team, we can decide that we will make a film about Paris 1874 without a commissioning editor at the BBC saying, "Oh, no one's interested," or the ABC. Um, you know, when SBS Arts, which all our films used to go to SBS Arts, when that was culled, sadly, it wasn't the end for us because, we had other ways of getting our films out there to an audience, although it's a great shame. Now, looking at the artists themselves, yes, now these artists, if they had the money to get a canvas, to get the brushes, to get the paints, they could paint. But what all artists are looking for is either to be commissioned or to sell their work. The salon was the great marketplace. Uh, they had thousands of submissions, 6,000 submissions, of which they took about 2,000, which is still a lot. And as you'll see in the film, the paintings are basically hung floor to ceiling in alphabetical order. There's no curation, and it's a bit like one of those stone walls where you look at it, you think, that's brilliant. How do they get the big paintings and the small paintings all to join? Now, if you've done your one painting, you've spent a year on it, and you go into the gallery space and it's right at the top, you can't even see it. People would have little booklets that would say, The Reichstag by Peter Kraus, but it's right at the top. You can't. So, and then who's deciding which 2,000 gets through and which 3,000 don't? Well, it's middle-aged blokes, some of whom have had paintings in the past accepted. That gives you some eligibility and pathway to being on the jury. I was actually on a jury yesterday for the BAFTAs,
Ah,
and part of that for the documentary award, and part of that is, of course, because of my background. There were actually 10 people on the jury. It was very good, actually, but a complete mix of backgrounds and film production CVs, if you like. But absolutely the combination of these 10 individuals delivered 4 nominations and 1 winner. And I can absolutely assure you, 100%, a different 10 people would have delivered a different 4 nominations and plausibly a different winner. So it makes a big difference. It has a big impact who these people are. And some of these judges simply didn't they didn't think that impressionist work was art at all. They thought it was worse than sketching. It was a threat to their own. You have to bear in mind these individuals come to it with their own um, painting practices or their own friendship groups or their own heritage and history. And these young whippersnappers are turning up with something which is really radical. And some of the impressionists simply can't get their work through. Some did. And one of the points of the exhibition, which we don't really go, it's mentioned in the film, but it wasn't the main part of our film. But one of the points of the exhibition was the salon was changing. Some impressionist works got through and were often reviled. Manet's Luncheon on the Grass, the famous painting of two dressed guys and a naked woman and another woman behind coming out of the water. People were horrified by that. It wasn't the nudity as such. There was plenty of nudes on the wall, but it was just the way in which that woman was naked and the fact the two men were dressed and the style of the painting. So because these artists are struggling to get past these jurors, because they have no control over the way in which their paintings are then presented, because in that environment people are actually laughing at them, they decide we're going to find our own space. It's as much a commercial decision as anything else. And in their space, they have maximum, which is what they did in those days, 2 rows of paintings, more or less artist by artist. And the artists were there to talk through anybody that came, explain what the paintings were about. They're 2 rows, but they're more or less on eye level. And they would have spent time making sure there was nice wall hangings and, it was all very nicely done. There probably was drinks and aperitifs. But the reality is that basically barely anybody came. Everyone went to the salon. 500,000 people go to the salon. 3,000 people go to the exhibition. But historically, it becomes known as the first Impressionist show. And there were 8. And basically, by the end of the 8th one, these artists are en route to being, amongst the most successful artists in history.
Yeah.
Their paintings now sell for some of them sell for in excess of $100 million. At the time, they were exchanging them for bread and sausage and brushes and paints, giving them away.
Yes.
When Van Gogh died, Van Gogh's a post-impressionist really, but when Van Gogh dies in a cafe that he's staying in Auvers-sur-Oise, just north of Paris, there are lots of paintings that aren't even dry. His coffin is laid on a table in the cafe, and these paintings are put on the walls around, and people are told, look, you can take one if you want one. Nobody else wants them. I mean, these are paintings that are now worth 100, $200 million. I mean, that's the art market for you.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that at the time, these artists were doing something new and radical, and it wasn't appreciated at all to begin with.
Exactly, and you certainly reveal all that so well as always in your film. One thing I found remarkable, I mean, you've always had, or in many of your films, you've had photos and some contemporary scenes and so on. But one thing that stood out for me was the animated people walking down the street in Paris or whatever. What incredible that I found that incredible. How did you come by that footage?
It's an interesting. It's nice for us when we get into the photographic age, and even of course when we get into the film age. Photographs are wonderful, and of course we are dealing at a time when photography has been born, and indeed these artists are in some ways reacting to the birth of photography. we are now, so to understand the artists at the end of the 19th century, there are all sorts of factors that you have to understand. You have to understand the arrival of Japanese art for the first time. You have to understand the invention of photography, so on and so forth. It is no different for me as an artist because today, I mean, throughout my career, since we first met, the technological changes have been extraordinary and affect what I do. Documentary films really weren't in the cinema 20 years ago. And certainly films about artists like this, absolutely no way. So in this fraction of a moment of history, we've gone from basically nothing like this to me releasing 3, 4 films a year to cinemas in 50 countries. And that's because of technology. Where we are right now is exciting and scary, which is technology is moving extremely quickly, and artificial intelligence, AI, is already having a role. Platforms like ChatGPT are really they're extraordinary and interesting, useful and useless. I'll give you an example. This was funny actually. So I'm making a film at the moment, big film about a big artist to be announced in a few months. But I said to him, I asked ChatGPT. I was filming on location. I asked ChatGPT, um, why did why did such and such happen to this particular artist? And ChatGPT came back and said, well, it happened because of so and so. And I said, no, I don't think so and so existed. And ChatGPT said to me, this is all instantaneous. He said, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. It was actually so and so. And I said, no, I don't think so and so was even around at the time. ChatGPT immediately, without any kind of embarrassment, it's a machine, said, no, you're right. I got that wrong as well. That didn't happen either. So it just makes stuff up. And then when you challenge it, it goes, yeah, you're right. So you've got to be really careful. But to answer your question, the exhibition in Washington, I believe, had these photographs. So there's still photographs, but basically you can now ask AI to animate them. Now, I saw this the other day. It was moving. Somebody sent me a picture of their relatively recently deceased father. It's a picture of her with her father. And there's an app, and you can ask, and the app will animate it. So I mean, I don't know what I think about this, but basically this photograph was then animated of him giving her a hug.
Hmm.
Now she got some, she for her that was quite nice. So we should applaud it, I guess. But AI will look at a picture and now think, okay, so these individuals who are standing still in this Parisian boulevard, this is how people walk. This is how horses move. I mean, it's not perfect. Um, and it creates this scene. Now, for us, we have to think, okay, is it more useful in terms of just giving you a flavor of the time, or is it actually counterproductive because you are distracted by it, or it's not perfect, or you think, hold on a minute, is that real? Is it not real? But, so this is the danger with AI. And I mean, so many feature films now are they're shot in studios on against green screen. It's all CGI. You know, ultimately, all these things come down to storytelling. If our storytelling is strong enough, as it is in $500 million feature film or a $50,000, $5,000, $50 student film, whatever it might be, if the storytelling is strong enough, you're not distracted by what else is going on. So hopefully it adds something. It's certainly for us, ultimately, we decided to keep it in because it just gives you a sense of just how cosmopolitan Paris was.
Hmm.
And the added reason for including it is that what people almost certainly what your audience don't know about, which is so important, is that for the Germans and the French, we always think in Western Europe, in Britain, two world wars, 1914-18, 1939-45. French and Germans, some of them, they know their history, but we'll have a different view, which is they talk about three wars. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870, which in Britain, I would imagine that nobody's heard of, or, less than 1%, actually was a really significant moment. And although the French launched the war, the Prussians very quickly win it. They bombard and occupy Paris. And Paris suffers. And we have some images in the film which show, if you go to Paris now and you walk down the Tuileries or you walk to the Louvre, or these places were bombarded, partially destroyed, burnt to the ground. It was a serious moment in French history. Somehow, 4 years later, you have the Impressionists painting dance scenes and poppies in fields, and you have to ask yourself, well, would British artists in 1949 have been painting like that after such a terrible 6 years of warfare? So part of it is to ask, how they emerged, and it's connected. There is a connection between what happened in 1870 and these artists. One, what they do themselves. Some flee, some sign up, some remain. But you can't understand these artists, and you can't understand 1874 without understanding 1870. And that was part of the justification for the footage, because you see how very quickly Paris is rebuilding itself. There's a really very beautiful painting by Monet of the very boulevard where they have their show. And that boulevard, which in his painting is full of life, the trees are blossoming, it's just packed with people and horses. And 4 years earlier was the scene of a terrible engagement fight with lots of casualties. And therefore you start to think, okay, it's part of Monet's narrative that we can bounce back. We are reborn. We have recovered. So it just helps. It's easy, and I can understand why people with Impressionist painters, there is a visceral pleasure in for us in the color, and we understand the narrative straight away. It's a boulevard, it's a dance scene, it's a fishing scene, it's a woman with her son or daughter walking through a field of poppies. We get it straight away. Looks beautiful. What you have to understand with the Impressionists, and what we always try to do with exhibition on the screen, is that there are many layers of storytelling going on. I don't think it's an accident that Monet chooses to paint that boulevard. I think he's deliberately painting that boulevard because it was known for being a site of a, awful engagement between the French, but anyway, 4 years earlier. Bear in mind that after the Prussians leave quite quickly, which is kind of interesting. Then there's kind of a civil war in France, and there's almost nothing worse than civil war where neighbors, brothers, are killing each other. But Paris bounces back, and that is partly the reason for the Impressionists, partly the narrative in their paintings. It affects their lives in many, many ways.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. My Zoom is telling me it's about to run out, but we could go on talking about this for a long time. But we want people to go and see the film in cinemas, and
Absolutely.
exactly, and that's so important. And so, Dawn of Impressionism, Paris, 1874, is now screening in Australian cinemas. Phil produced
Eventually,
it.
I'm going to
Yep.
just say a couple of very quick things. One,
Yes.
we've worked, we've been screening in Australia now for 20 years with the In Search of films, which did very well, and
Yep.
then the exhibition on screen. We distribute ourselves into Australia, so we have the direct contact with cinemas. And there's been a dip in audiences. I don't really understand it,
Hmm.
but once or twice we've thought, it cost us quite a lot to get the films there, to publicize them, the posters, the hard drives,
Hmm.
um, and it's becoming a little bit marginal. There are one or two cinemas that do very well still in Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, but I would ask audiences if your audience if they like these films,
Hmm.
just please drag someone else along, bring some friends, bring some family. We kind of need to see a bit of an improvement. Van Gogh, Poets and Lovers, which for us is our second most popular film, um, didn't do as well in Australia as I would have hoped, for
Oh.
example. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is I do love talking about art. I have a podcast called Painting of the Week. Um, and I think that your audience would quite enjoy it. It's myself and a friend, and we choose a painting and we talk about it in the ways that I've just been talking to you. Um, Painting of the week. So I would highly recommend that. And yeah, that's those are my two pitches.
Brilliant. No, absolutely fine. And what's the website for people to get more information about this film and all your other films?
I think the easiest thing to do is to go to exhibitiononscreen.com.
Ah,
I mean,
excellent.
you'll see the 39 exhibition on screens, clips from past films, access to past films,
Yep.
news about forthcoming films. And through that, you will get through to our mother website, which is the Seventh Art Productions, where if people want to see In Search of Mozart or Making Heavy Water, Making War Horse or whatever, all the past films,
Yep.
Q&As I might have done in cinemas or, all that kind of stuff is also there.
Excellent stuff. And I also commend you and Ali Ray, who directed the film, this one, and he's done others as well.
Ali, Ali, Ali's fantastic. And
Yep,
it is remiss of me not to have mentioned her. She made the Frida Kahlo film, the
yep,
Mary Cassatt film,
yep,
the Klimt and the Kiss.
yes,
And I've just been talking to her earlier this morning about what I hope will be her next film. My National Gallery was hers too, which I thought was a super film where you had 21 individuals who work at the gallery. Well, most of them work at the gallery, choosing their favorite painting.
yes.
Um, and the interviews she got from them, it's a directorial skill to put people at their ease. No, she's super. And this was quite a complicated film because you got two exhibitions which were slightly different, and the easiest exhibition narrative is the chronology of a life. This wasn't that. So she had to navigate decide where to put emphasis and where not to, and which paintings to film. And
Hmm.
she's done a great job.
It does. She's done a great job, and of course you co-wrote it with her, and of course produced. So, look, Phil, congratulations. Looking forward to your next exhibition on screen film and talking again. But certainly, I urge my audiences to go and see Dawn of Impressionism, Paris 1874 in selected cinemas in Australia. Phil Grabsky, as always, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you very much. Till the next time.
Till the next time. All the best.
Bye bye.